coming to get you, Barbara. They're coming for you, Barbara. Look, there comes one of them now.
Welcome to the latest episode of the movie breakdown. And not only are we a week late from the long promised review of Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, but we're not even going to review Beverly Cops Axel F today. And actually, there isn't even a we, there's just a me. Christopher Spicer, because once again we're throwing complications into the movie breakdown. Because I'm not sure how many of my wonderful listeners follow me on social media or how many of you read the Beyond the Balcony site. If you do either of those things, then you've already been spoiled. You've got the spoiler of what I'm about to announce. But for those who don't read those things, I have really unfortunate news to announce. My amazing co-host and very good friend, the incredible Scott Martin, has come to the very hard decision to decide that he is going to take a hiatus from podcasting for now. And it is for an undetermined amount of time. He's not sure how long he's going to be taking a break from the movie breakdown, but it's going to be happening, and it could be for quite a while that he will not be able to podcast for a bit, which obviously is very sad. And we have been doing this podcast for over 10 years, and I have appreciated talking movies with him for over 10 years. I think we have created a really fun podcast. We've had our ups and downs, and the last 2 years, for many reasons, has been rough as we haven't posted as many episodes as we used to. We used to be very consistently a weekly show for almost a decade, and that hasn't quite been the case recently. And we have apologized for that. But we have, I think, formed a great chemistry. I think we are a great team, and I think we made some really fun and entertaining shows and offered up our perspectives on movies. And it was just great. Scott and I used to be roommates, and actually it started way back where we met each other. I think it was at grade 12 in high school, and we kind of immediately hit it off and became friends. And then from there, we eventually became roommates for several years. And so we lived together for quite a bit. And then we sort of went our separate ways as life goes. And we both got married, and we lived in the same city for a while. And that's actually how the movie breakdown started, is we recorded it in my office every single week in the same room. But then he eventually had to move. And so this podcast became a way of us connecting when we lived in different cities. Each week we still got to kind of hang out and talk and do what we would do anyways, talk movies every week. And so I really appreciate this podcast because it's a way that we were able to keep our friendship going. And I have so much love and so much appreciation for Scott. But for now, he's going to be taking a break from the movie breakdown, and I am going to miss him. Well, obviously, we'll still try to connect as much as we can, but this was a great way for us to stay together. And I think like I've already said, I think we put on a great show, and I hope you listeners enjoyed what we've done. But I don't want to put the movie breakdown on hiatus. I feel there's been enough stops and starts. I feel the last 2 years there's been enough long stretches where you haven't been able to listen to the movie breakdown. I have stated that I want to get back to it being a weekly show again, and I'm sticking to that goal. It's just going to have to be without Scott for now. So what does that mean? What's my strategy going forward? Well, first of all, we do have some reviews and episodes stored away in the vault that you've never heard. And so the plan is to refurbish some of those, do a few edits and tweaks so that they don't feel too dated. And those are going to be posted at different times going forward. There's also going to likely be episodes that will have to be solo episodes. It's just going to be me talking, and hopefully that's entertaining. Hopefully I can find a way to keep you engaged. And with the potential there being solo episodes, this may finally open the door for me going forward with something I've thought about for quite a while, which is doing a YouTube version of this, a video version of this, because it's going to be a lot easier doing a video version of sort of one person than it would have been with two people sort of recording from different spots just to make it look good. I know that's possible too. A lot of people do it, but this will be easier sort of getting that started. And so that may be something I'm looking to do soon, not right away, because there is different logistics for that and lots of kind of work to get that started and make sure it looks good. But it is something that I'm going to eventually work towards. But so there will be some solo episodes, but I'm also really thinking about looking out and finding an interim host or sort of a rotating collection of guest hosts. And I have two visions for that. Either what it means is I'll have a guest host that I do the entire episode with, and we do our normal thing where we review a certain collection of movies, or, but this may end up being more work than it's worth, or I could be doing several hosts where each review has a different host in that episode. So if I review 4 movies that week, maybe one of those episodes is solo, then one episode could be with another host, another review could be with another host, and you get to hear different voices throughout the episode. I haven't worked out how that will all work out. It's going to be dependent on how many people are interested in being a guest host on the movie breakdown. I am actively looking and reaching out to some different people about being a potential host on this show. But if some of you listeners have been here for years or maybe even a month, but you're like, I really love this show and I really want it to keep going. I want to hear those dulcet tones of Christopher Spicer every single week. This is your opportunity if you love talking movies and you love the idea of podcasting, then I am doing an open call of the potential of being a guest host on this show. So please reach out to me if you are interested in being a guest host on this show, and we can talk and discuss and see how that'll work. Like I said, I would like to sort of try a few different hosts and see which ones we have good chemistry with, who I have good chemistry with, and who sort of we seem to be a good fit together. I think with me and Scott doing it for so many years, we really got into our groove. And I think we really sort of knew how to play off each other and put on an entertaining show. And that's a hard thing to sort of recapture. But it doesn't have to be the same chemistry. I can have a different vibe with a different host. We just want to have someone that it works well with. It makes the show work well. And so that's my open call. If you're interested, and you can reach out to me at christopher.d.spicer@gmail.com or the movie breakdown at gmail.com. Either one of those, you can contact me and say that, yes, I would like to look at the potential of being a guest host on this show. I've already had a few really cool people say that they'd be interested in being a host. And so I haven't reached out with them. Got back to him completely with sort of the details because I'm still sort of figuring out my vision of how we're going to do this. Probably the next few episodes are going to either be solo episodes or some posting some stuff from the vault where you can hear Scott's voice a few more times. I'm also seriously considering, at least most weeks, having my son Everett, who is now 12 years old and loves movies almost as much as I do, that he's going to come in and at least review maybe one movie with me most weeks, seeing if we can make that work. Because it's been a long time since Everett has made an appearance on this podcast, and people seem to be a big fan when he did show up. He's a lot older than he was when he used to make his appearances, but we might review some movies as well and see how that goes. And maybe he'll be such a great fit. He'll be a long-term host, or at least until Scott comes, or who knows, maybe it'll be a three-man team. We'll figure that all out as things go, kind of roll with the punches. But that is the plan, is that I want to keep the movie breakdown going. I just haven't quite I haven't quite figured out how that's going to happen, but the plan is most definitely that we are going to return to weekly shows. It's just unfortunately going to be without Scott. You're stuck with me every single week, but the movie breakdown will return to a weekly show. Most people will remember that when the movie breakdown first started, it was every Monday. It would be posted every Monday morning. And then a few years ago, for various reasons, it worked out better to be every Tuesday morning. And then we recently, but this has been so sporadic that who knows how often it actually ended up being the case, but it started being a Wednesday posting time, was every Wednesday. I think I want to go back to Mondays now that it's sort of a one-person show at this point. I think I want to return to Mondays. I just like that idea better, especially if I'm reviewing a new release picture, that it's much closer to the day the movie came out than Wednesday, where now it's been several days that the conversation has already got going. There's already been lots of reviews that have come out, and so the podcast gets a little behind. So my plan now is we are going to move it back to Mondays every single week so that the movies are a little bit fresher. And I just like the idea of kicking off the week with the movie breakdown. Now, saying that, I still am contemplating of doing maybe some more bonus episodes, but we're just going to see if how I can manage that with everything else in my life. But right now, definitely guarantee that there'll be an episode on Monday, but there is potential of maybe having some smaller episodes show up on Wednesday and Friday, sort of either two episodes being like a Monday and a Wednesday, and then maybe even some weeks when it's really working, sort of three episodes where you have the Wednesday and the Friday. I don't know what those episodes would exactly be. They'd probably be on the shorter side. It's very likely that all these episodes are going to be on the shorter side. There was once a time where we were popping out these giant episodes that were over 2 hours long. And then it started getting down to more 90 minutes. They're likely not going to hopefully even approach an hour, especially the ones where it's just me, because that's a lot of me just talking that you have to listen to me. But here we are already over the 10-minute mark, and I haven't even done too much other than explaining that Scott's gone and we have some new plans going forward. So I can definitely, hold my own when it comes to talking by myself and going a long time. I'm afflicted a bit with the verbal diarrhea. Hopefully all of you have not turned off this episode already and you're still listening. But yeah, I gab. But yeah, so expect episodes on Monday mornings, and then sometimes potential of some bonus episodes going forward, and as well sort of eventually looking at video and all that fun stuff. I want to there were some reasons why we sort of moved away from doing new releases. Now that it's just me, the plan will also try to do a new theatrical movie most weeks when that is something that I can pull off. So yeah, look forward to all that. That'll be a lot of fun. But what are we doing today? Now that I got my attention, like, is that going to be the whole episode, man? You just saying that Scott has left? I read it on the social media, so you're wasting my time. That's what you're saying, or that's what I'm guessing that one of you is saying. And no, I decided that we will still try to do some kind of episode this week. And what it is, what we're doing this week is obviously the summer box office challenge, the annual event that we've done where we do the draft in April and we both pick 10 movies, me and Scott, and then we see who did the best in their movie selections, as it's what movie had the best opening weekend, and then you total all up at the end and we declare a winner, and then the winner gets to choose three really awful movies that the loser has to watch and review. Well, because Scott is not going to be doing the movie breakdown for the foreseeable future, there's not really much point to sticking with this edition of the Summer Box Office Challenge. It was pretty obvious that I was going to win, but I don't think it's fair now that with Scott and I even podcasting that I'm going to force him to have to review his three movies. So we are going to declare the Summer Box Office Challenge unfortunately canceled this summer. But I thought that since that now is sort of off the table, what I did want to do is quickly look at sort of how did the summer box office go this year. And this is with very little research right now. This is me just looking at sort of the box office mojo from week to week. That is all I'm doing here right now. And so bear with me, but I just thought it'd be interesting to sort of look at what the this summer has been, because it's an interesting summer, because obviously now we are distanced away from COVID. People are ready to start going out again. People have returned to movies. And so you can't use sort of the COVID reasoning as an excuse of why people aren't going to theaters. But we are coming off of a big, giant actors strike last year, which really slow things down because you can't make movies without actors. And so a lot of the big budget tentpole style pictures that were supposed to come out this summer got delayed because they weren't able to finish it. And so 2025 is more likely going to be your more traditional stacked summer. This summer didn't have those same big budget spectaculars. It did have some, but it wasn't your traditionally loaded summer. And so for that reason, that's what makes this a bit more interesting summer, is how did this summer fare when you don't have those same level of big heavyweight pictures? And we're in a spot where people are really nervous about the future of theater going and sort of that state of the theatrical experience. And so I just wanted to look a bit of like, what are the things that are connecting with audiences and how did this summer turn out? That is what I thought would be an interesting thing to look at this week. And I know there is a few of our listeners that are really into sort of the box office. When we do talk about box office, we don't do the box office every all year, just because I don't necessarily like. I feel like the industry as a whole has become more business, and really sort of commercializing cinema. And I'd like this show focusing more on sort of the artistic side and the creativity and looking at sort of the movie's value and what it is in connecting with us emotionally and as an artistic creation rather as a product. Because my thing is, a movie's value isn't really in how it did in the box office. It's in how actually good is it? What is it as a creative piece? A movie could have bombed in the box office, but been this amazing picture. And so I feel our podcast job is to champion that movie and try to get more people to see it rather than care about how well it did as a piece of product. So we don't focus on the box office all the time, but I think it's an interesting thing to do once in a while, and that's what we're going to do for the rest of this episode. And so let's go to the first week of what's considered the summer in terms of movie going, and that's the first week of May, which I know for most people is not summertime. It's not summer until school's out in a lot of people's minds, but in the movie business, it's become the beginning of May because that's when traditionally the big Marvel movie has come out in the last decade. And often it's the biggest movie of the summer that comes out the first week of May or sometimes the very end of April. That's not the case this year because lots of those Marvel movies ended up getting delayed. And so we ended up only having one Marvel movie this summer. And it didn't come out the first week of May. The big kickoff movie of the year was The Fall Guy. We've already talked a little bit about the disappointment of that opening weekend of The Fall Guy. We really thought it was going to, because it had such that great spot, kicking off the summer, we thought it was going to be a way bigger hit, but its opening weekend ended up only being a little under 28 million opening weekend. And I think, and we've talked about it a bit, so I'm not going to go too long, but I think there's a few reasons why it had a bit of a disappointing opening weekend. One of the cases is Ryan Gosling. I mean, the year before he was in the Barbie movie, which was a big, massive hit. And then you also have Emily Blunt, who is a great, great star and a great actor. But I don't think their names themselves are massive draws. They themselves, just being in a picture, doesn't necessarily prove to be something that people come out to. But we're also living in an era where stars don't mean as much. Anyways, I also think there was a bit of an issue of sort of the marketing. It's called The Fall Guy, and I don't think that's a TV show that really resonates with people in 2024. So that name, I don't think sells the picture at all. And the marketing maybe wasn't quite clear in what people were getting here. It is an action fueled, stunt driven romantic comedy, really, a romantic action comedy. And I don't think the market ever really let people know that this is kind of like your Romance in the Stone or Lost City, that this is something that is, it's got a lot of comedy and it's got a lot of romance. It's a love story. I don't think that was conveyed properly to people. I think it really pushed more on sort of that stunt part and that Hollywood part. And Hollywood loves making movies about Hollywood, but Hollywood movies have not necessarily proven, like movies about Hollywood, movies about movie making are interesting to me, but at a mainstream level, those don't necessarily seem to connect with broad audiences. They don't really care about seeing a movie about movie making. It seems a little bit too much like self-congratulatory. It seems a little bit sort of self-centered, and when it's like, oh, let's make a movie about ourselves, Hollywood. And so I think people weren't aware of what this movie was. And this movie is a lot of fun. You can listen to the past episode where I recommend this movie. I gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars. I thought Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt were great. If you have an opportunity to see this picture, because you haven't seen it yet, go see it. It is a blast. It's fun. It's got a little bit of crime noir. It's got a lot of energy. And it's one of the most fun movies I've had in the theater this year. I just thought it was a great time. And I think that's the thing is we're so used to talking about opening weekends because that has become so important with the box office nowadays, is with there being so much stuff out there, so much, like you've got the YouTube, you've got video games, there's just so much media that you can watch, all this different type of TV, streaming services, all this stuff, that it's coming in a spot where when it comes to the box office, we're all about sort of that opening weekend. That's where you're going to get all kind of the money. And we don't focus on sort of what it used to be like in the 80s, the 70s, and even farther back. It was about the legs. It wasn't about opening week. It was about how many weeks, how long can you extend? I mean, E.T. and Star Wars and Back to the Future, these past hits, they tended to grow as the weeks went on. They tended to get word of mouth. There was a time where movies sort of had some legs and they lost the whole summer. And the Fall Guy ended up proving to have legs. It maybe didn't quite have the opening weekend that I was hoping for, because I think it's a great movie, but it ended up proving to do all right. It didn't quite make 100 million when all said and done, but it was almost 93 million in the end, which still I think doesn't necessarily make it get all its budget back. It wasn't quite the hit it wanted, but considering the fact that after 2 weeks they already jumped to doing video on demand and they lost all faith of it being in the box office, and despite that, people kept on going to the theater or still doing decently in the theater. I think it shows about how this movie did eventually get word of mouth and it did connect with audiences. And I think the best lesson you could get from Fall Guys that studios sometimes need to be a little bit patient and realize some movies, they may not be that big, massive hit opening weekend, but have a little faith, give it some time, give it a few weeks, and it's going to grow an audience. It's going to end up having legs. It's going to end up sustaining itself a bit better. I'm interested. You're never going to know, but I feel that if they didn't jump to rentals so quickly, if they just let it stay in the theater for a little while without there being other ways of viewing it, would have it even done better? Would have it had longer legs? Would have it sustained itself? Would have it, proven to make even more? Would have it broken the 100 million mark? And part of me feels like it would have if it didn't go with video on demand. But that was your first sort of big picture of the summer. And then the next week after that, we are jumping into probably one of the biggest movies of the summer, in a summer where, like I said, there wasn't a lot of tentpoles. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes in most summers would have been considered sort of that middle blockbuster, that not quite big epic picture that a studio leans on, but a bigger movie, but not sort of one of your top pictures of the summer. But in this summer, where so many things got delayed, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes was one of the big heavyweights of the summer. It ended up being around 58 million opening weekend, which for a Planet of the Apes movie is pretty good, because that's kind of floating around where most of them sort of land. I mean, there is Planet of the Apes fans, but let's be realistic here. Going all the way back to the original, I grew up loving Planet of the Apes. I saw all the Planet of the Apes movies when I was a little kid. And I remember watching the Planet of the Apes series and being all in on it. But I think Planet of the Apes is always kind of a step above cult status type thing. It's never been sort of this big zeitgeist defining series. It's always been sort of a movie that the people who love the Planet of the Apes, they really do love it, and it's got its audience, but it's never been anywhere near Star Wars level or MCU level or Indiana Jones. It's kind of a, like I said, it's a step above kind of cult status type picture. And I think the recent sort of prequel trilogy that came out with it's Andy Serkis, the Rise of the Planet of the Apes, the Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and the War of the Planet of the Apes, it sort of did redefine what this series is. And I think it did make it captured a new audience, and I think it in some ways did grow in its popularity, but still isn't what you would call sort of those guaranteed hit series. And so I think that 58 million definitely is good, because it's showing that the series is sustaining. That after 3 movies, there's a lot of pictures that after you've sort of done your trilogy, people are ready to move on with their lives. But this proved that people are still really interested in the Planet of the Apes. And this was a really, really good movie. This is another one that I just thought was a great summer movie. You can listen to the podcast where I review this, and it's a lot of praise. I'm ready for another trilogy. This picture is clearly setting up another trilogy, and I'm all for it. I'm excited. And I think this movie was such a good picture and it did such a great job of introducing new characters that I feel like the sequel could even do better. I feel this is a franchise that's going to continue to sort of be a hit and grow an audience. And I encourage people to track it down. If you like kind of those sci-fi epic series, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is one to definitely jump on and enjoy. And after that, the next week, so the May 17th, May 19th weekend, we got If Imaginary Friends. It did a little under 34 million. And there was a time where live action family movies were very common. You could go all the way back to sort of, Wizard of Oz, but you think of the 80s where you got the Labyrinth and E.T. and the Explorers and Goonies. And the 90s, there was a whole bunch of them. For some reason, Heavyweights is like the first one that pops in my head. It probably should have been Home Alone or something like that. But that was something that was way more common than it is now. Most family movies, we just instantly think, Pixar and the Disney animated movies and the DreamWorks animated movies. That is what we've been leaning into more in sort of the last decade. There's been less of these type of movies where, I mean, also there's a lot of CGI here and all the creatures are animated. They did not cast real monsters here. They didn't cast real imaginary friends, but there is live action here, and that has not been as common. And so that was kind of fun to see them kind of go back to sort of the type of movie that they used to have maybe a decade ago or a decade and a half ago. And I think it did all right. You're talking about an original movie that is live action, and those things sometimes struggle a bit more. And I think this is a picture that seemed to connect with certain audiences, and I would love to see studios take a chance on a few more sort of original live action family movies. I know my daughter was really excited to see this one, and so I think there was a bit of an audience for it. I think based off the budget, it didn't end up being as much of a hit as maybe the studios were hoping. Around this time, the narrative was, the summer is a disaster and the theater experience is in trouble and Hollywood's going to explode because we hadn't hit that 100 million opening weekend by the third week of May when we normally would have at this point. But I think that as the summer went on, we realized maybe people were overreacting a little bit, but yeah, if maybe wasn't quite its hit, but I think it did all right. It did fine. I mean, it's in the top 10 right now. It's for the or no, it actually just got booted out of the top 10 for 2024. It's number 11 right now. But in the end, I think that's fine for a picture that did not have sort of that brand name behind it, that recognizable name in an era where that's what people go out to. I think it did fine. And I do want to say for those people who keep on sort of complaining like, everything's like either sequels or based off a franchise or based off something. What happened to the original movie? The problem is people just don't go out to a lot of original movies. And so they are not willing to put a budget behind it like they did with the era of the ETs or the original Star Wars or the Raiders of the Lost Ark or Back to the Future. There was a time where those pictures did well in the box office. And it could still happen. Original movie could still do well, but it doesn't happen as much. And we're in a global market where we have to try to where studios are trying to appeal to countries that English isn't their first language and they're not maybe as aware of American culture. And so they have to find something that's instantly recognizable that's going to draw out those audiences. And so that's why they lean on the sequels and the recognizable names. But if you go out and support an original movie, a good quality original movie, then studios are going to listen. That's what they listen to, is what draws out the people. And so that's my big thing, is if you want more original movies, support them. And I mean, If did break the 100 million mark. And so I would say in the end, they should be happy with how it did. And we're just in an era too where studios need to watch those budgets they use of making their picture. If you cut down that budget a little bit, be a bit more expert with your spending, then pictures like If are going to be considered more of a hit. Let's move on to May 24 weekend, May 24 to the 26th that weekend. And of course, this is one that me and Scott were completely wrong on. Furiosa ended up being a disappointment. It only hit 26 million opening, and it really did not prove to have tons of legs. It never quite ended up being a hit. It sadly kind of has to be a flop. And I think there's two big reasons I've already talked about in previous podcasts. So I'll be quick. But one, I don't think people are really all that interested in prequels and seeing like what something happened. I mean, if prequel was such a good story, wouldn't have you started there? And so I think people want to see the stories move forward. There is exceptions. There are some prequels, obviously, that have been hits, but I think they don't quite do as well as maybe a straight sequel would. And in this case with the prequel, I think what was a really big mistake is I love Anya Taylor-Joy. I think she's one of the best actors going. I think she is an absolute star. But she wasn't the original Furiosa. Charlize Theron was. And this may have been a totally different story if this starred Charlize Theron instead of putting a new actor into an established character. I don't think people are big fans of new actors replacing established characters. Same thing with, I think that's one of the reasons why Solo didn't do great, because it wasn't Harrison Ford. And so when you put a new actor in that spot, I think people have a harder time being connected to it. And I think that's what hurt Furiosa, which is a disappointment, obviously, because I think it's a movie that deserves a bigger audience. This is your great big epic action piece. George Miller always does something interesting. So it would have been amazing if it did better. It didn't. And then the other big movie that weekend was the Garfield movie, which did about 24 million, which, I mean, my kids are aware of Garfield. They know it's a thing, but it's Garfield, I don't believe is in the zeitgeist like he was in the 80s and the 90s when there was a cartoon series and there's all these posters and he was a big thing. I don't think this generation of kids really know who Garfield is or necessarily care about Garfield. The other issue, obviously, is it was a Garfield movie in name. This was not the cynical, selfish Garfield that people are used to in the comic strip. They made this a lighter, cheerier, nicer, snugglier Garfield. And so you're kind of left with, why did you even make a Garfield movie if you're not going to do the real Garfield? So I feel it did as well as it was going to do because it's going to alienate Garfield fans. And I just don't think the younger generation cares about the orange fat cat. I mean, kids love animated animals, so they're going to go out and see animated animals. But using the Garfield name, I think it's like a Fall Guy situation where how many people actually care about that brand. And so that's my take on that. And then the May 31st, June 2nd weekend, we don't really have any big box office pictures that weekend. It was sort of a retrend. It was not much of a big weekend. So Garfield ended up winning that weekend at 14 million. So it shows you it was a slow weekend. I feel that weekend is always a slow weekend for whatever reason. They don't tend to seem to release a new movie on that sort of May going into June. Not really sure why, but you look historically, there doesn't tend to be a lot of big movies that come out that weekend. At some point, Strangers Chapter 1 came out. That may have been the weekend before, I think, because looking at it right now, they're showing. Let me just see. When did Strangers Chapter One go? I know this is riveting. Me trying to here on the show find out when there was another movie, but uh, I just want to mention Strangers Chapter One because that's a picture that neither me or Scott picked, and we weren't necessarily high on that one and end up doing okay. It was way back on the May 17th weekend. It was the number 3 movie. So it lost out to Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, but it was the number 3 and it came out with almost 12, a little under 12 million. So I mean, this is an interesting summer because at this point back in May, we hadn't had that big horror hit yet in 2024. The last few years, we've had a lot of horror movies that have done really well in the box office, showing that's a genre that really connects to people, the theatrical experience. And we hadn't done that yet. And at like a little under 12 million, Strangers Chapter 1, that's not quite what you want for your opening weekend for a horror movie, which it tends to depreciate quite quickly in the weekends after that. A horror genre tends to often be sort of an opening weekend thing. There is exceptions. There is those big hits that do have legs. But this shows that I don't think the Stranger franchise is something that really means a lot to audiences. But like I said, it did better than some of Scott's picks. And so I think it did better than maybe we were thinking it would do, but it still wasn't a massive hit. It just shows that interesting situation that we weren't finding that big horror hit yet. We do get there eventually, but that's just fascinating to me. It did an okay opening weekend. Apparently, they've shot 3 movies already. They've already filmed the entire trilogy. So we're getting a chapter 2 and a chapter 3. They're coming anyways, despite this one not being a massive hit. So we'll be interested to see what they do with these ones, the ones going forward. Apparently, chapter 1 was not really a prequel at all. It was just a remake of the original, essentially. I really have no interest in seeing it because I've never really been a huge fan of the Stranger movies. But I just wanted to mention that. And we'll just move all the way now to the June 7th weekend because this is where we do have another big hit. And that's Bad Boys Ride or Die at 56 million. I have not liked the Bad Boys movie yet. This is just a series that has not connected with me. I like Will Smith a lot when he's not slapping people. I like him in a lot of the movies he's in. I think he's very charismatic, but this has just been a series that's always been so aggressively loud and over the top, and it just feels like it's trying to capture that 48 hours and lethal weapon type charm, that sort of mismatched buddy action comedy. But I just feel the comedy never lands and it doesn't have the heart that those pictures do. But there's people that really like these movies. They like the big action sequences, and I was really curious, sort of in this post slap world, what Will Smith was going to mean as a draw, if Bad Boys meant anything, and obviously it did. It had a decent opening weekend. It did very well in the box office. So people still love Bad Boys Ride or Die. So we clearly are going to have sort of a fifth one in the future, I'm sure. And I'll be just as interested in that one as I was about this one. And then June 14th weekend, June 14th to 16th weekend. And this is where we have got, at least to this point, the highest grossing movie, not only of the summer, but of the year. And we had a big, massive opening as Inside Out 2 landed with 154 million opening weekend, which that finally kind of shut people up as people were going on about how we hadn't had $100 million weekend. This summer is a disaster. And then Inside Out 2 comes, says, hold my beer. I am going to show you how you be a hit. And I love this for a few reasons. The narrative for the last few years is that Disney Plus has killed Pixar, that Pixar is not able to make hits or connect with audiences anymore in the theater. People are just going to wait for Disney Plus. People aren't going to see Pixar movies anymore. Its brand has been tarnished. It's not a draw. That was sort of the big talk. And bam, nope, that wasn't the case. Not the case at all. Pixar ended up smashing all the other movies that were trying to be hits this summer, and people are still into Pixar. And Inside Out 2 obviously shows that there is value in sequels and people want to return to these characters. They want to see Joy, Sadness, Riley, want to see them all again. That was something that connects. And so there is a reason why we keep on getting sequels. People like returning to those characters, as this is even a bigger hit than the original Inside Out. But I also think this has a bit of sort of the Barbie effect in that people want to see a big, fun tentpole picture and they want to see something that is recognizable, but they also want to see something that connects with them because it has something to say. And I've mentioned this before on this podcast. Again, I'm repeating myself. So hopefully you guys haven't turned off this podcast yet. But this is the idea that it's connected to something that means to people right now because so many children after this COVID and just all the state of our world right now with social media and all these different things, a lot of kids are struggling with mental health and anxiety and stress. I mean, we all are, but it's happening to a younger age now. And so this picture about where new emotions come, and they are those type of emotions. There is an anxiety emotion that shows up in this, voiced by the great Maya Hawke. And so I think that connects with people. This is a picture that is saying something that people can relate to. They can resonate with this. And I think it's great when there is those big pictures that are willing to actually deal with themes and things that are on in our world right now, things that we're dealing with. So when you can connect at that personal level, when you can hit people right at the heart, it is going to provide, it's going to draw in audiences. It's going to mean something to them. People want to be entertained, but they like it when you focus on something that is relatable, when you deal with a big issue, but you do it in an entertaining way. I think that's the formula for a big hit, and that's why Inside Out not only had an amazing opening weekend, but it proved to have legs. It is just a massive hit, and I love it because that could happen to a better movie. I love Pixar. I love the Inside Out series. So all those things are good for me. Good for you, Inside Out 2. And then we move on over to the June 21st, 23rd weekend. And Inside Out 2 still did over 100 million, landed that number one spot. Bad Boys Ride or Dies showed it had a lot of legs, keeping that number two spot. And then the new release picture that did the best that opening weekend was Bike Riders. It did a little under 10 million, which it's a focus features. It's a smaller picture. It's not going to get the same level of marketing. I think that's actually a pretty good opening weekend for the Bike Riders based off the type of movie it was. Maybe in another era, it would have done better. Talking about the 80s, something like that. Maybe this is the type of picture, starring Tom Hardy, Jodie Comer, Austin Butler, that you're hoping for a bigger hit during that time. But we're not living in that time anymore. And with all this streaming and stuff, I think that doing well in the box office, I think is a bit of a sign that if as long as a picture can have a bit of a smaller budget, that these movies that now are deemed like, oh, that's a streaming movie, they can do all right in the box office if you're smart with your budget and you have a little bit of faith. I mean, you still got to market these pictures. People need to be aware of them. At this point, I also want to mention that Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes was in the top 5 at this point after being being in the theaters for a month, and so it clearly shows that movie connected with people. Fall Guy had fallen out of the top 10 at that point, but At that point, it had been over a month. It had been out, and like I had said, it was also already available for rentals. And now we're going to hop on to the June 28th to 30th weekend. Inside Out continued to be the number one movie. Inside Out 2, that is. But the number one movie, it was the number one movie at the box office that weekend. And then, but the number two was A Quiet Place, day one, with 52 million. And this goes against my whole thing about, oh, Furiosa didn't do well because people aren't into prequels, because this was very much a prequel. But I think there has to be a caveat in that this was different because this was a prequel that was sort of explaining how a world was created. Clearly, people were interested in knowing how did the Quiet Place monsters get here? How did they invade the world? What was that first day like? And so it shows that this is a franchise that connected with people and they were interested in digging into the mythology. And that does happen sometimes. You can have hits, and this is a case that people were invested in this world. You had Lupita Nyong'o in the lead role. That's a fantastic actor. How can you not love Lupita Nyong'o? So I'm glad this did well. This clearly shows that this is a horror franchise that's got its loyal fans. It's a hit series, uh, probably rivaling like Conjuring when it comes to modern, newer horror franchises that kind of have their loyal audiences. And so it was one of the bigger summer hits and well deserved. And then we had a bit of, some people are marking it as a flop. Horizon American Saga Chapter 1 only doing about 11 million. The Kevin Costner starring directed picture hit number 3 that weekend as an opening. I don't really know what people thought it would do, how they thought it would do in the box office. I mean, it's not like westerns are super hot. I don't remember a great marketing campaign for it. I'm not really sure. I guess you can call it a flop maybe because of what the budget was for this picture. But in my world, 11 million for that movie. I mean, neither me or Scott picked it for the summer box office challenge. I mean, it's over 3 hour runtime. I feel like it should be happy with that, but people are declaring it a flop. My guess is because of what the budget would have been on that picture. Maybe Kevin Costner had better hopes of it being a big uh, box office hit. The also reality is that's a movie that's marketed towards an older demographic. You're marketed towards people like me and even older, and those type of people, people with kids, people who just have very busy lives, they're not as concerned about those opening weekends. The younger audiences are all about, you got to see the movie the opening weekend. You got to see it when the dialogue, the conversation is hot, so we can talk about it on social media and stuff. But older audiences aren't like that. They'll take their time. Think back several years ago, The Greatest Showman did not have a good opening weekend, and then ended up being one of the highest grossing movies of the year because it had so much legs. People started coming out after it. Actually, the audience grew the weeks after and after. You had weekends that did better than its opening weekend, which is almost unheard of with when it came to The Greatest Showman, and started connecting with people. And so movies like that, you can't see them as opening weekends. You have to see them as how their legs are going, how they do the weekends after. Horizon didn't really do great though the weekends after either, but there you go. I like a good Western. I would have been happy for it to be a hit because I'm all about diversity. Let's have a whole bunch of different movies in the theaters. Let's have a whole bunch of different genres. So that's my stance on that. July 5th to 7th weekend, Animated Power, Despicable Me 4. It did not break 100 million. It only ended up at 75 million for its opening weekend. But for me, it's showing that franchise is huge. It's hot. Fourth movie, and at that 75 million, that's showing it's something that's still connecting with the kids. They love those minions. What's crazy about the Despicable Me series is the Minion movies, the ones that are called Minions. So the Minion branded ones, which there have been two of them, I believe, at this point, they do better than the original. So Despicable Me came first, and then you had the spin-off with the Minions, and the Minions actually do better in the box office than the Despicable Me movies, which is crazy. Partly because I don't really know the huge difference. I mean, the Minions are all over the Despicable Me movies too, and you usually still have Gru. I guess Gru wasn't really in the first one, but the second one, it was a younger version of him, but he was still all over the movie just like he is in the Despicable Me movies, but the mini movies do better. It's one of those cases where sort of the sidekick characters, people want to see more of the sidekick characters. They want them to drive the movie. And because they're aware of that, they let them drive the movies in the Despicable Me movies now too in both cases. But for whatever reason, people like the mini movies even more. And knowing that knowledge, I think this is one where the studios, Universal Picture, needs to be happy with how Despicable Me 4 did on its opening weekend. It's proven to continue to do well in the box office. And that's while Inside Out 2 was still doing great in the box office. It did 30 million after being out already for several weeks. It was the number 2 movie, and so animation dominated the top spots. The other significant release, Maxine, at number 4. I had the art house horror series. You had X, Pearl, and then this is the third in Maxine. A little under 7 million, and it's coming from A24. It's a smaller kind of studio. I feel like the series is only going to do so well. It didn't even make it to Brantford. It wasn't a lot of theaters. It was in 2,400 theaters, but it wasn't even available in my area. And so it definitely wasn't necessarily getting a big release, which is kind of weird because Pearl X both made it to Brantford, but for some reason Maxine didn't. So I haven't been able to review it yet, but according to a lot of the critics, this is sort of the lesser of the three, too. This one's considered a little bit of a disappointment. And so there you go with that as we move along to the July 12th, 14th weekend. And this is a fun little story. So the big sort of new release movie that weekend would have been the Channing Tatum, Scarlett Johansson starring romantic comedy Fly Me to the Moon, which has to be considered a bit of a disappointment. It was the fifth highest grossing movie of the weekend. It didn't even hit 10 million. And that's a big disappointment, especially as someone who likes romantic comedies. And you have this romantic comedy that didn't do great. Well, I'm saying, hey, romantic comedies are connecting with people. We need more in the theater because we've had evidence of some romantic comedies that have done well recently, like anyone but you with Glenn Powell did well at the end of last year. And was it the Trip to Paradise, the George Clooney and Julia Roberts starring picture that did really well? Lost City, considered sort of a comedy, and it did really well. But this one wasn't quite the hit that people were hoping for, and so to me, that's a little bit of a disappointment. And I just to go back to anyone but you, because her name um, was not coming to my brain. Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell. Sydney Sweeney has been all over movies recently, so she deserves to be mentioned. She was, I believe it was in Immaculate, a horror movie earlier this year. And then she was also in, obviously, this, Anyone But You. She was in Madame Web. She is, she's becoming a star as well. And so she deserved to be mentioned. So I'm mentioning, hi, Sydney Sweeney. But going back to this one, Fly Me to the Moon. didn't quite, I think, do what people were hoping in the box office. And I hope studios don't take this as a lesson of, oh, let's stop putting romantic comedies in the box office because we have evidence that no, they do work. I think this one is just, what is it? Is it a romantic comedy or is it a parody? Because there's also that whole idea of them filming as backup in case Americans don't make it to the moon. They film footage, sort of going with that whole belief that the moon landing was faked and Stanley Kubrick filmed it, and that whole conspiracy. This movie's kind of leaning into that, except they reference Stanley Kubrick. He's not the one who films this sort of fake footage of going on the moon. And I think the fact that the marketing was sort of confusing. Is this a romantic comedy? Is this a parody? Is this a satire? Is this a political comedy? What is it? I think that mixed messaging probably was the undoing. And again, I think romantic comedies are less about the opening weekend too, and more about word of mouth and legs. And so, but I think in all cases, Fly Me to the Moon didn't quite deliver in sort of what people were hoping as a picture. I'm trying to find where it is at for the year. um, as a picture, how it did in all of 2024. My computer is not helping me for that case. Fly Me to the Moon is the 39th highest grossing picture of 2024. It only ended up at this point with 18 million. So that's got to be considered a little bit of a disappointment. So it hasn't necessarily proved to kind of grow an audience. I mean, it came out on July 12th, and as of this recording, we're just at sort of the end of July, so it hasn't had tons of time, but I think it definitely did not connect the way that people were hoping. But the big story of that weekend, of the July 12th weekend, was Longlegs, because it was distributed by a smaller studio. This was not sort of a big studio picture, and it's kind of a horror picture, kind of a thriller, and I don't think anyone released this thinking it was going to necessarily be a big, massive hit, especially when some of the other kind of bigger deal horror movies didn't end up being big hits this year. But $22 million weekend for Longlegs. Wow. That's a great opening weekend for Longlegs. Scott sort of picked this movie and thinking it was going to be sort of one of his foolish picks, and it was not. It was one of his better picks, and Longlegs, you could just say it was a hit. Uh, Stars Maika Monroe, who I absolutely love, but not necessarily a big box office star. She does more a lot of kind of independent pictures. She was great in It Follows, a horror movie from way back, I think, in 2014 that both me and Scott really loved, gave a lot of praise to. And Nicolas Cage, who I love, who Scott loves, who all of you should love. We think Nicolas Cage is fantastic, but his last few pictures that were mainstream wide releases did not do great in the box office. You had Renfield, and you had, what was it, The Massive Weight of Unbearable Talent. Both those pictures did not do fantastic in the box office um, in wide release. Oh, sorry, it was I got it all wrong. It's The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. It's not massive weight, it's unbearable weight. It's weight that we can't bear, folks, because the talent is too massive. But I mean, that did not do what I had hoped or anyone hoped in the box office. So he hasn't necessarily proved in the last few years that he's a box office draw anymore. So you can't say, oh, Nicolas Cage was the draw here, or Maika Monroe was the draw here. It's just clearly people wanted a horror picture, and maybe they didn't want the same old, same old. We've had enough of those sort of supernatural haunting pictures in the last few years. Longlegs is about a serial killer. It's kind of like Silence of the Lambs-ish, that style of picture. And clearly that's something that people missed. Totally original movie, original idea, not based off something as far as I know. So all that's fantastic news. It's showing that if you do original horror, you can bring people out. That is a genre that still works for original movies. That and kind of animated are the two. And so this is fantastic. This is a sign of maybe we could get some more movies like Long Legs. It's a weird kind of art housey style horror, and it connected with an audience, and that's fantastic. And I'm hoping to review that movie on the podcast in the very near future. But that's great. I love it when horror does well, and it definitely connected with an audience. And Micah Moreau and Nicolas Cage being a hit, I'm all for that. Yeehaw! And then we go to the next weekend, July 19th, 21st weekend. And Long Legs, 11, almost 12 million in its second weekend, fourth spot, just beneath those two animated powerhouses, Despicable Me 4 and Inside Out 2. And then the number one movie of the July 19th weekend was Twisters with 81 million. And that has got to be considered a win for Universal Pictures. The first Twister came out in 1997. That was a long time ago. And kind of like a Top Gun Maverick situation where you're having a sequel to a movie that was quite a bit ago, and you always wonder with sequels that are, those legacy sequels several decades later, how much does that movie still resonate with an audience? And I feel like Twister's not necessarily something that people have super fond memories of, or it doesn't seem to be anyone's kind of favorite movie. I know it's got to be someone's favorite movie because every movie is someone's favorite movie out there, and maybe one of my listeners that is your favorite movie, but I don't feel anyone was really begging for another Twister movie. And so with Twisters, I had no idea how it would do. And then sort of natural disaster movies are not in vogue right now. There hasn't really been too many in the last few years. And when they were out, the, the most recent ones were more kind of flops. And so I was really wondering. But one of the reasons why I thought it could do all right is the fact that we're in a world of sort of superhero fatigue. I mean, there was almost no superhero movies this summer, but in the last few years, there were signs that genre was waning, and I think people were wanting something different. They weren't wanting the same type of pictures, but they still want that big special effects experience, and that's what Twisters delivered. We haven't had a supernatural movie in a while. They were very popular in the past, and so I think this is something that is, and again, you talk about sort of that brand name, something that's recognizable. And I'm not talking about the Twister franchise. I'm talking about the fact that people know what a natural disaster is. They are aware of the natural disaster. And it does go well for big special effect type picture. And so I think movies that have sort of that easily understandable concept is going to draw audiences out, especially when it promises spectacle. Twisters did all those things. And so it ended up being a hit. I talked about natural disasters. They were sort of one of the first big kind of blockbusters of the 1970s. You had Towering Inferno and Earthquake and the Poseidon Adventure. Those were big, massive kind of blockbuster special effects pictures of the 1970s. Airport. Airplane is the parody of it, but yeah, the airport pictures as well. And then Twister kind of reinvigorated the natural disaster genre. I'm talking about 1997's Twister, because right after that, you had like Volcano and Dante's Peak and Armageddon. And so there started to be this reemergence of disaster pictures again. And so there's an interesting history there with sort of the Twister franchises that sort of brought back a genre. And I'm interested now with this Twisters being a hit. Will it bring back a genre? Are we going to see some studios greenlight a few more natural disaster pictures? That's not really one of my favorite genres. I've never been a huge fan of natural disaster pictures, but I could take one or two here. It's fun seeing some things get destroyed. When it's not your stuff, if we can go to personal corner, as we will, Speaking of natural disasters, if you want to be offer up an excuse of why there was not a podcast last week, I mean, I haven't been consistent on the site. I haven't been consistent with the podcast. So, I mean, you'd be forgiven if you're just like, it's just your usual week where you just allow your emotions get in your way of not being able to manage things. But to toss in my already battered emotions and struggles I've had for the last little while, we had a big giant flood last week. My daughter went downstairs to see if we had any ice cream, and instead she found that we had an indoor pool now. And so our basement was like ankle deep water, and so we had to get someone to get all the water out of our house, and we had to tear up the entire basement, which sucks because we renovated the family room down there 9 years ago. And so that's the room that my kids grew up in. That's the room that my kids played in. I have so many fond memories of it. And it was a huge emotional gut punch seeing that room get torn up. And we had to throw out like 50% of our possessions that were down there because the flood was so bad. We've had to try to rescue photo albums because, there was a time where not every picture went up on a cloud. These were pictures from sort of pre-cloud era, pre-digital, because we're that old. And yeah, so that it was not a fun time. So natural disasters in the real world are not fun, but they're okay on the big screen. But that was a peek into the life of Christopher Spicer. And now that's it for weekends that have happened. But for weekends that are coming, July 26th to 28th weekend, this weekend right in front of us, right here coming. We're all the pundits are saying we are going to have the highest grossing movie of the summer, and if not the highest grossing movie of the summer, if it doesn't catch up to Inside Out 2, we are going to have a big hit. And I think they are right. It's Deadpool versus Wolverine is coming this weekend. This is going to be a big, massive movie. Or I guess it's not Deadpool versus Wolverine. It's Deadpool and Wolverine. But I've seen the trailers. They fight guys. I guess they team up too. But all these versus movies, they team up. King Kong versus Godzilla, they teamed up. Batman v Superman, they teamed up. So and what's the difference? But anyways, I think what this movie's going to show is the value in not doing 3 or 4 MCU movies in one year. Let's slow down on the number of superhero movies, the number of MCU movies you get in a year, the number of series that you put out. You put out a little less, I think you're going to get bigger returns. People are ready for an MCU movie. This also, the return of Wolverine. I think that's a huge draw. Hugh Jackman being Wolverine again. Deadpool movies are going to offer something different. It's going to be R-rated. The first Disney MCU R-rated movie. So that is a huge deal. I think all those things are really big draws for people. And so that's what we have here is Deadpool and Wolverine. It's an interesting deal there, and I think people are going to be interested to see how Deadpool fits into the cinematic universe. What does Deadpool mean to the cinematic universe? How's he going to fit into this world? And so people are interested in that. I think it's going to it'll be interesting what it does for future MCU movies. But this one alone, I think it's going to be a big, massive hit. I think it will be one of the biggest movies of the summer. And I think, the lesson here is you don't need to do a whole bunch of one thing in one year. You space it out a little bit, make people anticipate, and you'll have a big hit. So that's the summer for now as it stands. And so thank you very much for if you stuck around and listened to that. I appreciate it. The plan is to review Deadpool and Wolverine in the next episode. The plan is for the next episode to be Mondays from now on. And so hopefully you will have a review of Deadpool and Wolverine come Monday. And we'll see what else I decided to put on that podcast. And we are, like I said, now planning to do weekly shows on Mondays. And again, I want to apologize for the episodes being so infrequent. I've I've done the tales. I have been struggling with mental health. I am going forward with that, getting medical help, trying to get that worked out. And my career is building up. I'm working with a great ad agency right now where I am doing work for several clients, and then I have some other clients on top of that. My career is in a rebuilding phase. It's not where I quite want it to be, but it's going in the right direction. And I'm hoping with all those things in place that I can focus a bit again on the podcast and on the site, and there will be some interesting stuff for people to read on the site, which is Beyond the Balcony, beyondbalcony.com. Please check it out. There is some stuff on there. I have a picture of Everett going off to camp. I talk a bit about the flood, and I have some revisits on there, and just trying to get sort of the podcast moving the site moving and grooving, but also trying to get the podcast going. There'll be stuff for you to read, stuff for you to listen to. And if you do like this show, one way you can help us out is rate and subscribe to us on Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the different places, Amazon Music, and all those places. And another way you can help us out, or help me out, is listen to us on the Spreaker app. Consider it. Think about it. That would be fantastic. And so, yes, I will be back here next week, maybe by myself, maybe with someone else. Who knows? It's going to be a mystery. But the plan will be to review Deadpool and Wolverine, and maybe a few other things too. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode all by myself. I am Christopher Spicer, and that's it. I'm the only one. There's no and Scott Martin, and there won't be for a while, except for when I post stuff from the vault. But Scott Martin, if you are happening to listen to this, I love you. You're amazing. Thank you for over 10 years of doing a fantastic podcast. You'll be missed, and can't wait until you can come back. But once again, thank you for listening to this episode, and have a great week at the movies.